Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. We're here for another morning show talking through all the latest Celtic news and events. I'm joined by Ewan Davidson this morning on a Wednesday rather than a Thursday. But how are you doing this fine Wednesday, Ewan?
Good, yeah. If you ignore my complexion, I'm actually feeling quite healthy. I'm doing all right. Yeah, I was just saying to you before we kind of went on air that I was watching a video last night and didn't realize how young Josh was, and that's genuinely terrifying. So, giving me a lot to think
It
about today, really, in terms of life achievements, etc. So, kind of depressing.
terrifies us all. I've got my
Yeah.
40th birthday this year, Ewan, so that sparks its own existential crisis. But we won't get into that today because I could be there for an hour speaking about my personal anxieties. We're all good here. We're calm. We're happy. We're happy to see people joining the live chat this morning. Really
Hello.
appreciate that as always. Unfortunately, the kind of or kind of the timing of the discussion of what we're going to be talking about today is slightly awkward from our perspective because yesterday, if you joined us for yesterday's show, we almost did a full video on the Casper Schmeichel situation before it had transpired. We didn't have any information on that. We weren't kind of trying to go ahead of that news that we'd kind of learned behind the scenes or anything. It was just the circumstance of how it all unfolded mean that we wanted to reflect on Casper Schmeichel's situation. Then hours later, the Celtic goalkeeper himself basically confirms that his Celtic career is over and potentially his playing career in totality. So we're going to run through that news this morning. I don't want to do a rehash of yesterday's show, so I will try to move on a little bit in terms of like what this means for Celtic and how they might handle these kind of situations going forward, because I think it is relevant, and I'll explain why in a moment. Just on the Kasper Schmeichel news himself, he was on punditry duties for Manchester City versus Real Madrid last night for CBS Sports in America. His father, Peter, does that regularly, and he joined Peter and Micah Richards for that. In the post-match interview, they did a segment, and essentially Kasper Schmeichel revealed pretty bombshell news that he's going to be out for up to a year. So these are the quotes on that. He said, "I was at a specialist on Monday. Basically, I'm going to need 2 surgeries now to fix my shoulder, which is a bit of a body blow. I've torn the bicep, torn the rotator cuff, dislocated the shoulder, torn the labrum. Everything's kind of gone. To maybe put it into terms that you can understand, it's like an outfielder doing their ACL and their Achilles at the same time. It's looking like 10 to 12 months of rehabs. It's been a strange few days." So undoubtedly unfortunate news for Kasper Schmeichel. And yeah, he's had a long career. He's played at the top level. He's won some incredible trophies. He was exceptional for Celtic in his first season. But it looks like, certainly at Celtic with his contract up this summer, he has already played his last game for Celtic Football Club. So our best wishes to Kasper Schmeichel in that regard. Ewan, just what's your immediate reaction to the news, just from a Casper Schmeichel perspective? As I say, I gave my own thoughts on this yesterday, so I'm not going to go too in depth on how I'm feeling about Casper Schmeichel as an individual. But just what are your thoughts hearing that news last night?
I guess there's two things. The first thing is I feel really awful for the guy. I've been looking at sort of like sports psychology recently and about how players react to certain things recently, and a guy like Kasper Schmeichel was born a goalkeeper. Because of his dad, because of everything his dad represented, he's been a top level professional his whole adult life. He's had an outstanding career, especially at the international level, representing Denmark so many times, and the way he was raised in that sort of football and culture, retirement's hard anyway. I can only imagine what it's like for any sort of footballer, especially at the top level, when you go from once or twice a week, that pressure environment, and the reward of potentially making a massive intervention in the game, scoring a goal, making a massive save. Like, replacing that anyway is difficult enough, but when you don't have control over your own exit, and it sounds as though Kasper Schmeichel won't have control over his own exit, it's pretty devastating, really. I really feel for the guy, and you can say, okay, he was, he's a son of Peter Schmeichel. He's had a relatively charmed life compared to most of us, etc. He earns a lot of money to be a goalkeeper, but I really do feel for him because I would say he's certainly earned his right to leave in the way that he'd want to, and you'd hope that for any footballer to leave in the way that they want to. But this is a pretty devastating injury, and I'd be amazed if we ever saw him in a Celtic shirt again, as we're saying. The second thing that really stands out is I don't want to be casting any aspersions of the medical staff that work at Celtic, and I don't know what the work that they do that goes on behind the scenes, and I certainly am not qualified to make any sort of condemnation of them. I don't know how though you miss injuries like this. or you miss him to an extent where you're throwing. And I don't want to repeat anything that was said last night, but this is how much quite scandalous. I don't want to retread over things that you've already articulated. Is what I mean. But
no, I'm happy to get your perspective on it, Ewan. So feel free. I think you raise a good point here, and I think this is probably what is most relevant for Celtic. Look, I'm always of the mindset of like what's happened has happened. It's how you move forward and like kind of what this means for Celtic going forward. You talk about psychology there, and it's a really important part of this, I think, because there's an element of here of Kasper Schmeichel trying to cling on to something that was no longer there. Okay,
yeah,
and I'm not reading between the lines in what he says. He actually, what he says after he goes into his injury on CBS Sports last night, basically gives a very good insight into where his head was. And these are quite alarming comments for me, what I'm about to show from a Celtic perspective, because I think there's a duty of care here that Celtic have not fully acknowledged. So he said, Kasper Schmeichel later said in an interview towards the end, he says, I've come through the old school where you play through injuries. I fell in a game probably about 6 weeks ago. I dislocated. Like an idiot, I was just thinking about these World Cup qualifiers for Denmark. I've got to get there. So I took the injections, took the pills to numb the pain and tried to get through it. But at this point, the consultant asked me if I was all right in the head. His words were, are you all right in the head? Football means everything to me. It's been my whole life. It's been my whole identity. There's a lot of things right now to try and wrap my head around. Emotions are all over the show at the moment. I'm trying to keep my mind busy. So, listen, my viewpoint on this, and listen, Kasper Schmeichel's getting a lot of blame for this, and he's getting a lot of anger directed his way. But this is the mentality of athletes who reach the top level of their profession. You know, they're going to push every part of their body. Even Kasper Schmeichel said in that interview last night, you know, he had a knee operation when he was 16, and he persevered and came through it and went on to play, 900 games professionally. These athletes, that's what they need. That's the mentality they need to give them the edge that you all love in matches every single week. They push themselves to the limit. What we need in this situation, what a club should offer in this situation, is guidance above that and a duty of care above that can step in these situations and ensure stuff like this doesn't happen. Now, my worry about it is, Ewan, I think, I'm not one of these football purists who think that Celtic should only be signing 22, 23-year-olds, players who have value going forward, players at their peak. I think there's value specifically for Celtic because of their history and their status, that there is value in, pursuing veteran players, pursuing players who are probably on the decline, because the reality of the Celtic situation in Europe is that elite players on the decline will probably perform pretty well for Celtic. But my concern is if we're doing this with Kasper Schmeichel, what does it mean for how Celtic handle Callum McGregor? What does it mean for how Celtic handle Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain? This is something that Celtic need to learn from and understand, that this goes beyond like a player declaring himself fit, for example. Yes, a player, an athlete is always going to have, I think, that kind of almost selfish mentality about how they go about their business. And surely the onus is on Celtic here to have stepped in far earlier than they did, Ewan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what this reminds me of, and again, I don't want to cast any sort of aspersions, and please correct me if I'm misquoting here, but it reminds me of when Kieran Tierney did an interview with Open Goal. And I don't remember the exact quotes, but I remember it being very much a case of like Kieran Tierney was kind of, I don't want to say his like passion for Celtic was sort of being leveraged in a way. It was about like just playing through injury and like, oh, come on, you'll be fine, and like get the injection and just play through it and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's a really, I don't want to say that there's an unhealthy culture because I don't know, but I do think if people are willing to criticize Kasper Schmeichel for trying to get through playing an injury, then there is a list the length and breadth of Celtic Park of players you need to start pointing the finger at for playing through injury, because that is what you say. It's the elite mindset. It's the mindset the players have, and we praise players for being absolute warriors out in the pitch and for sacrificing themselves and for doing it for the club, doing it for the badge. In essence, that's what Kasper Schmeichel is doing. And yes, there's an element of ego there because you don't want to, especially when you're a 39-year-old goalkeeper who has been an international for so long, you want to leave on your own terms if you do have to eventually. But I don't think it's possible to, or it's certainly not honest to praise certain players for playing through injury and then criticize others. And it shouldn't have been up to him, really. Like you say, there's a duty of care from the club, and that goes for any player. And it does give you concerns about the injuries we have this season, about players that have been rushed back. You talk about Callum McGregor, you talk about Oxlade-Chamberlain, who will need, he'll need wrapped up in cotton wool quite a lot of the time based on his injury history. And that's no criticism of him. That's just luck of the draw. fine player, but he does have an extensive injury history. It does give you concern, and we saw the likes of Srirachi rush back. We saw Alistair Johnson rush back, and three different managers have been clearly given information that isn't correct about Casper Schmeichel, or it's been a case of, or you can say Casper Schmeichel said, "I'm fine, let's just do this," or managers have persisted because he's the most experienced goalkeeper and he was excellent for most of last season. I don't know that there's so much kind of mystery about this, and I think it's kind of on the club to maybe clarify what's happened
Yeah.
here, because it's
Yeah,
not
and
healthy. No pun intended.
I think I would like clarity too. And listen, I'm not. There's a comment here and it says, "Sorry, that's not the one." It says comments keep disappearing. Sorry if that's happening. By the way, that will be a YouTube glitch more than anything we're doing. I'm certainly not deleting anything. But AR saying here, sorry, but I find it nigh impossible that Celtic made him play if he's saying he was injured. That's not what I'm saying. Really, I'm saying that Kasper Schmeichel's desperate to play and pushing to play and saying I'll do anything to play, and we know he was getting injections, so it's not like Celtic just thought everything was hunky dory. This isn't a tight calf. It's not a tight
No.
muscle injury. It's not a player just kind of playing through that. This is like a serious shoulder issue that he suffered on international duty that I think he was probably rushed back too soon for in the tail end of that last season. And this has been an ongoing issue. So it's really about ensuring that the player doesn't do damage to himself, because as he admits, he was kind of pushing to kind of make this World Cup and have this fairy tale ending to his career. And yeah, I think it's a reality of football. And I'm not saying this is unique to Celtic. I'm not saying Celtic
No.
have done something massively out of order here that isn't within the culture of football. I'm saying you can't run these players into the ground. And I think it's especially true when, if you're in the process of running them into the ground, it's actually costing the team points, performances, potentially trophies. We saw the Scottish Cup final last year. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there's issues all around this, and what I'm saying is I'm not looking for recrimination from Celtic. I'm kind of I want to ask Celtic, what are we putting in place to ensure this doesn't happen in the future, because we have players who are approaching older ages, and we don't want to see a decline to the extent that it starts to cost Celtic on the pitch. Ultimately, that's what we all care about.
Yeah, you're right, and also in terms of bringing players in, players are. I think so much goes into transfer, so much more than we can know, really. But I would imagine, especially for players who have had injury concerns, like, okay, how good is the medical setup there? Is there precedent for other players recovering well from their injuries, especially long-term injuries? Older players, and if we want to replace Casper with an experienced hand, and no pun intended, that was terrible. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. If you want to replace Casper Schmeichel with experience, experienced goalkeeper is going to say, well, okay. I mean, are they going to, are any injuries I might pick up, are they going to be treated effectively? And yeah, like you say, it doesn't just go for Celtic, but it does raise a lot of concerns. The kind of the detail of the injuries that he had, he shouldn't have been anywhere near the pitch. I mean, that's all I know is I dislocated my shoulder in a sack race in primary 7. It was devastating. And that was
that a blow to your athletic career? Yeah, is that the end of your footballing dreams?
Look, I mean, the Commonwealth team for Scotland were looking at me for sack race in the games in what 20. I don't know what year it was. I don't want to think about it now. But yeah, no, but like, those are horrendous injuries, especially for someone who has to dive at the ball repeatedly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of questions there. There's a litany of questions, and I guess you can kind of go back to the post Anton McElhone kind of medical setup at Celtic, because there are these questions about long-term injuries that a couple of players seem to have had timelines that keep being moved and moved and moved. Jota is kind of a good example of that. Alistair Johnson, we kind of maybe initially thought it wouldn't be such a long injury, and he's been out for quite a while. We don't really know the full extent of Callum McGregor's problems at the moment. I think there's maybe more to it, especially the fact that it's such a there's such a cycle there in terms of every time we get to this point in the season, he has the same recurring injury. So yeah, I'm not saying it's conspiracy theory time. I'm not saying we should need to like turn up with torches and pitchforks outside Celtic Park and ask to see a doctor. Like, I'm not saying that, but it's concerning because there's player welfare is an important thing here.
I actually probably think there's probably a little bit too much anger around Casper Schmeichel as an individual. You see a lot. I do think it goes too far at times, and it's really one person I kind of feel sorry for in this situation almost is Martin O'Neill, because he was kind of speaking in last week, in the tail end of last week, that he's he's feeling better, he's back in training. I think the belief is that he had an injection recently, and it gave him it hit a nerve or something. And he was feeling ill as a result of it. I think that's how that story goes. So he was saying he's
Mhm.
feeling better. He's in Lennox Town. Then, like a matter of days later, it's like Casper Schmeichel's on the verge of retirement,
Yeah.
and obviously Casper Schmeichel's gone through his own kind of PR, etc. I'm going to be interested to hear what Martin Neal says later in the week on all this, and how he feels about how the news has come out, and then kind of like, again, what Celtic can learn from that situation too, because it's come out in a kind of in a weird way, I would say, and it's
Mhm.
not exactly normal. I'm sure Celtic would have probably wanted to manage it a little bit better. It just leads to a sense that a lot of stuff behind the scenes at Celtic's in a little bit of chaos as a direct result of kind of all the upheaval this season. Another
Mhm.
example of it, I think, this week with all of this.
Again, you go back to muddled communication. You go back
Mm.
to, and I know injuries are different, and I know there are certain. We're not entitled to know everything all the time, but
No, no,
equally,
no, no.
if a first team player has a serious injury and our manager is getting information that's contrary to what the player is saying to Danish television, it just the visuals of that are terrible. The optics of that
Yeah,
aren't good. Um, and it kind of goes. I mean, it's not necessarily the same, but one of the main complaints, I guess, from the fans collective and from different kind of fan groups is that the communication from the club just isn't great on a range of different issues. And maybe this is too dramatic, but or maybe I'm going to into battle
go
for
for it.
Martin
Reach for
O'Neill
the
here.
stars, Ewan. Go for the drama.
I think it's disrespectful, actually, of a club legend to give him
Okay,
information that makes him look a bit daft hours later. I just don't.
okay, that's
And
fair.
you can say
I
that,
think that's
and
fair.
you can say that, of any Celtic manager, but especially this one,
Yeah.
who is doing is really really helping out Celtic this season.
Hmm.
To give him information that makes him look like he doesn't know the injury status of his own first choice goalkeeper
Yeah.
is pretty bad.
Yeah.
At worst, it's pretty bad. Not at best, it's pretty bad.
I kind of agree with that. As much as I'm saying like some of the criticism of Casper Schmeichel goes too far. Listen, he's his own man.
Mm,
I guess he has no. Well, he does have an obligation to Celtic because he's under contract at Celtic, and so I think it probably could have been handled a little bit better than kind of contradictory messages in the media.
mhm,
I don't enjoy that. It just makes everything feel like more of a shambles. One of the big questions around this for me is, if we're talking about the Stuttgart game, is the game that he re-injures the shoulder. He plays
mhm,
against Hibs days later, and that's not good. No, you can't be dislocating your shoulder on a Thursday and be playing on a Sunday. I don't know. I don't care how many injections you get or what type of injections you're getting. That
mhm.
cannot be allowed to happen. And again, we don't know the story, and I'm not ascribing blame to individuals. I'm saying structure at Celtic need to understand that if you are going to sign veteran players, you have to know when to stop. You have to understand where the decline is and take
Mhm.
bold decisions to ensure that decline doesn't hurt the team. And I guess that's what I'm wanting to take away from this situation. It's not about being angry at Kasper Schmeichel. It's not about being angry at any individuals behind the scenes at Celtic. It's just like, what can Celtic do better? And hopefully these are the conversations and the thoughts that they're having internally within Celtic. Again, the
Mhm.
summer is a perfect time to address all of these issues. You're never going to have a better opportunity in the midst of a rebuild to kind of set a new direction, a new culture
Mhm.
within Celtic as a staff and as a squad. And I don't like the old school mentality of you play through injury. I think it's
No.
pretty destructive, and I think it's pretty toxic ultimately.
Mhm.
But it exists, and you need to ensure that when it does exist, it's not hurting the team.
No, exactly. I mean, my primary school didn't put me back in a sack race the week after. You know what I mean? So, but it is bad. And we talk about getting to the summer and talking about that rebuild. And Sinisalo has been, for his part, excellent. And I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed watching him in goals. I think he's, as he covered last night, he's played in some pretty massive games and come through it looking really good. And the goalkeeping situation will be its own thing in the summer. But what we have benefited from, the last, and it sounds bizarre because we've won titles and trophies, but we've gone through different managers, very different ideologies, different playing squads, and one of the consistent things you can bring in that context is a goalkeeper who's got a lot of experience, who is really good at working with a backline who may be inexperienced or um, different languages, different levels of experience, that kind of thing. And you saw it with Joe Hart. Joe Hart was excellent in that role, and Casper Schmeichel until his injury last season, very much the same. And a real leader. And he's had to work with some real patchwork back fours in his time, just like Joe Hart did initially. So, if you want to make that argument for bringing in an experienced goalkeeper again, I think it's a really good argument. You should probably be looking at maybe smaller clubs in the bigger European competitions and seeing who's performing. I think that's a good way to do it. Because I'm not really sure about the option. I looked at some out of contract goalkeepers in the summer, and I think there are some that are kind of way beyond what Celtic are capable of attracting, and then there's others who you're just a bit like, I don't know. So it's
It's
difficult
such
to
a
do
weird
specifically this summer.
position. I mean, it is
Mhm.
such a weird position.
Yeah.
It is. Listen, how are you feeling about Dundee United this weekend? Just switching gears a little bit. I'm
Mhm.
conscious that I've been talking about goalkeepers for about 3 hours this week on this show, so I don't want to do people's head in too much. Just how are you feeling about the upcoming 3 games? Had it come in and it's tough, like that tough run. You feeling okay
Mhm.
about going to Tannadice this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's a chance to right another wrong from the season.
Mm.
And I mean, so much over the last, I guess, maybe month or so has been kind of just exercising some demons from earlier on in our season, and to get a result at Tannadice would be particularly good. And also, Tannadice has been a place where so many title races have been decided, of course, and so there's a bit of kind of poetry there. It's look, I I don't want to I don't want to get into cliche territory and say things like every game's a cup final, and also that you can't in this league there are no easy games, that kind of stuff. But it is kind of that because Dundee United are still capable of pulling off some decent results, and they've got some really good players. Dundee is a tricky trip. Stephen Presley is working. He's not the man you come to for trophies, but he is. He's actually doing a really good job there after a difficult start. Honestly,
Thought I'd stumbled into only an excuse there, Ewan.
bring it back, and
Yeah,
pay me a lot of money
okay.
to do it. No, yeah. So don't take any games for granted here, especially given what we've seen from Celtic this season. Definitely don't take any games for granted. But I would probably suggest, as others have, that in terms of this run of fixtures that we've got leading into the split. I mean, you've maybe ticked the big ones off by now. It's just a case of grinding out results. It might not be very pretty football, but it might be actually the case that the Motherwell game was a real show of intent, and in terms of
Mm-hmm.
tactically and in terms of the pace of the game, especially in the second half. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that is us clicking into gear a little bit. That'd be great. So
Ian, it's just
yeah.
something I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, you wrote an article for the website on Sunday,
Mhm,
like a reflection on how Saturday went because you were at the
mhm,
game and you felt it. Just talk to us a bit about like that because I don't think we've spoken much about on the show about that this
mhm.
week. Just in terms of you kind of sensed that change or something almost different within the kind of general atmosphere in the stadium.
Yeah, and again, this is my personal point of view because I was speaking to pals in different parts of the stadium afterwards, and they said, "Well, I don't know." And then others were very much like in agreement. So it just shows you it's subjective. But from what I felt, certainly, there was a real rush of kind of noise and excitement. And yourself when we're playing these big games, and either we concede a goal or we're putting a lot of pressure on, and we're banging at the door, and a goal's coming, and there's that roar, there's that just that kind of just that guttural kind of visceral roar from the Celtic Park crowd of everyone just like willing the team on. We haven't really heard that in quite a long time, and that's not to blame supporters or anything, but there's been a sort of kind of laconic kind of vibe to watching Celtic this season, and quite a lot of the season, where it's not quite defeatist, but because sometimes the product on the pitch is so dismal, and we've been playing like really just trudging through games, and it's gone side to side, and then you see the strikers making runs, and there's no point making a run because the ball doesn't get there. But yeah, you heard this kind of roar, and I felt like Celtic had been kind of willed on in a way that has been missing for a lot of the season. There's a whole debate about the Green Brigade, obviously, and the atmosphere would be
Mm.
improved within there. You can argue with me all day long about that if you want to, but the atmosphere is better with them, and it's better to have that sort of kind of conductor running,
Are you
kind of
kind of
keep
getting
keep.
at Ewan is like it almost felt like I understand the Green Brigade create a great
Mhm,
atmosphere, but as you say, it's conducted.
mhm.
As your kind of point, it was kind of more of a natural response to the going ons of the game, which some people
Yeah, exactly.
miss. Like that's how I grew up watching Celtic. There was no real
Mhm.
ultras when I was a youngster
Same here.
coming in. It was all reaction to the game as it unfolded in front of you. The
Mhm,
perceived grievances and the highlights and the long busting runs and the big tackles, like that was
mhm.
more about what the atmosphere was about. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Exactly. That's a much more succinct way of putting it, John. Thank you. I realized I just vamped there for like 2 minutes. Yes. Apologies for the waffling. Yes, it was reactive in a good way. You know what I mean? Like and yeah, there were songs and it did feel a bit more sort of united. And this isn't to suggest that there aren't problems at Celtic and that everything's better and that we don't need the Green Brigade and all this stuff. I'm not. Please don't put any. Not you, but like none of those words are coming out of my mouth. I'm not saying any of that. But like, it did feel. It felt different. It felt different. And even this the sort of pre-match atmosphere, because again, I think maybe it was partially reaction to being told how awful Celtic fans were all week and how terrible we are for celebrating a goal at Ibrox and you know, the UN are bringing peacekeepers in to sort out, these awful Celtic fans, all this stuff, right?
Does that mean Neil Doncaster's going to get a FIFA Peace Prize? Is that his line for that?
It stuns me he hasn't already got it. Such a prestigious award. Don't let me get into politics, John. That's a mistake. Okay. But yeah, it did feel slightly a reaction to that, just to sort of, you know what, you can say what you like. We're going to generate the noise in here. We're going to get behind our team today. And so there's a bit of that, and also a bit of we're in a title race now. Every game is massive, and we start playing some really good football. And it's a bit of a chicken egg situation in terms of did the good football generate the atmosphere? Did the atmosphere generate the good football? Either way, I was happy, and it was nice. It was genuinely positive. And you can't say that very often about the start of the season. So, yeah, it's good.
Just going to bring in some comments here. Charlie McGarvey saying, just going back to Schmeichel, some of these comments, everyone, folks. Charlie McGarvey saying, astronauts in the International Space Station notice that there is no excuse for our medical department not to have done the proper investigation. Yeah, good bit of power there. Someone else saying, I noticed McLaughlin saying, we owe both Dundee teams a battering. So yeah, I think that, listen, you talk about right and wrongs. I don't know how much that feeds into like the mentality of players, but I always sometimes I like the concept of a revenge game. Yeah, and I quite like that. I think it's something that might give players an edge. I don't think Celtic need to be finding or looking for edges right now. There's such an edge to everything as it is, but there is an element there. As you kind of mentioned it briefly, but yeah, we need to do a job on Dundee, both Dundee teams, because they've done a job on us this season.
That's very true. Yeah. I almost forgot about the result at Downs Park early in the season. Yeah, it's there is a kind of, again, I don't want to like harp on too much about psychology, but kind of one thing I've noticed from watching different documentaries and things from sports in the last few years, some of the most competitive and like I don't want to say insane, but like some of the more unhinged but like successful athletes create these narratives in their head of this like we lost last time we played them, so there's a kind of, and I took it personally, kind of logic to it.
Yeah, it's the Michael Jordan Last Dance thing here, but I think we've discussed Last Dance on here before. I think it seems to come up all the time, Ian, because we're avid fans of it. But we like perceived grievances are okay in football, they're okay in sport. I like that. I mean, I like an edge in sport. I like players talking their S as to speak. I wouldn't swear in here, I might get censored by YouTube, but I like players just coming out and being bold and brash. I mean, I don't know if anyone follows NFL, whatever. People might know I follow the Seattle Seahawks. I've done for many years. They won the Super Bowl this year, and they did a Super Bowl parade after that. And basically, one of their players went on the podium and said, if you don't like us, F you, basically to the entire nation. And I mean, that would cause a riot. That would literally cause a riot in Scotland. But I like it. I wish I don't like the way football's gone at times where it's gone down this more sanitized PR route when it's just all the same kind of sound bites coming out from players and managers. Bring personality back in football. That's my mission, Ewan.
Definitely. And, when I want to see a Celtic team that goes out against Dundee United and Dundee and just it wants to be absolutely relentless and, wants to repeat that 9-0 at Tannadice, that'd be nice. But yeah, I want to see them with a bit of grit, and actually grit and that mentality. We've maybe not heard it explicitly in a sense, but we've seen it, definitely. Certainly since Martin O'Neill's come back. And I think he, of any Celtic manager available to us, he is number one in terms of getting every last mental resource out of these players and motivating them, putting them in the right mindset. And I think that's exactly what we've seen. We've managed to sort of drag ourselves through games, but also there's a bit more about this Celtic team than maybe we thought. And it was not an unfair criticism over the course of the season to ask, is there a bit of mental fragility about this team? Is there a bit of I don't know, players being past their sell-by date in terms of Celtic. Like they've done it already. They're mentally checked out. And by the way, like I think you can only fault that to a point. But now we're seeing, and again, it's kind of a problem of our own making because Celtic have been so poor at times this season and lost 7 games and all the rest of this, right? But it is definitely like it's recovering from our own self-sabotage. But if we're going to recover in style, recover with the mentality of we're going to hammer everyone we come up against and we're going to win this title, and there's nothing you can say about Celtic this summer if we manage to do it, because having absolutely come from the depths, from the absolute Nadir Chifji of early this season, and imagine to get through. And if we do win the title, it's an incredible achievement, even if it's because of our own feelings. There's nothing you can say about Celtic at that point. That's it.
Yeah. Just an update on Elijah Just. So we had a story on Celtic Way yesterday. Josh McCafferty spoke to Elijah Just's agent yesterday and essentially was told, look, this guy's not making any decision on his transfer future until after the World Cup, because obviously he's on duty with New Zealand. He's not in a rush to make a decision on his future, very much committed to Motherwell and this summer. So any Elijah Just thing will probably be late summer at this point. The World Cup throws a spanner in the works in terms of recruitment. Ewan, equally, it's potentially an opportunity as well to maybe see value that maybe others don't see. Famously, Gordon Strachan spotted Shinsuke Nakamura in a Confederations Cup match on television and brought him to Celtic after that. He said, who's that player? I need to bring him to Celtic, when he was newly appointed the Celtic manager. So there's opportunity and setbacks from the World Cup this summer. I guess we're just all hoping that Celtic, surely, we talk about right and wrongs. Surely Celtic have been hard at work putting in place processes that will help us this summer.
Do you reckon?
No. That was a forlorn hope.
Yeah, I hope so. You can go either way, because the World Cup is a really good audition for a lot of players, especially players who maybe don't. And that's one of the things, without sounding too nostalgic and jumpers for goalposts about it. I have a very good skincare routine, and I'm older than I look. And I do remember that sort of mystery of watching players at the World Cup or the Euros who you didn't really see much of, because it wasn't pre-internet, because internet existed, but you just didn't. You maybe heard about them on like LMA Manager or something, or you maybe heard about them because there was like some clips, like some highlights on like Channel 4 or something like that, and you saw these players for the first time, and you were just like, oh wow, okay, they're actually they are players. So there's an element of maybe overrating players because of what they do during the tournament. But also, yeah, it's a great audition, and especially when the stakes are extremely high, they're representing their country, and there's a lot of players, because obviously the World Cup format's bigger. We're seeing a bigger pool of players who might not necessarily play in leagues that we have access to, legally speaking, have access to watching, and so yeah, you can pick up gems there. And you think of players that maybe been discovered, through kind of international duty. I think Emilio Izaguirre might be one, in terms of what he was doing for Honduras. And there's different sorts of players. As long as you don't wind up signing a player for an inflated price based on like a few good games they had in the tournament, because that can happen. But equally, yeah, it's an exciting opportunity for Celtic scouts if there are any, and I have to assume that there are. I have to hope that there are.
Estepona boy, just to switch gears completely again, I'm throwing everything at you today. Bodo got well scalped last night, but honestly, they've been excellent in the Champions League. The Bodo Glimt dream is over. We've been talking about them all season as an example of a club punching above their weight in Europe. They were knocked out by Sporting Lisbon. Now, Sporting Lisbon's turnover is not that far away from Celtic's. It's not obscenely higher. So, should we switch our attention to Sporting Lisbon as a potential model for Celtic of how to succeed in Europe? Interesting goings on. It's just, again, it leads into this absurdity of Ross Desmond saying Celtic are not a club that can compete in Europe. Lessons all over the shop for me. Yeah, Ewan.
Yes, the Sporting Club are a really interesting example, because we talk about kind of ultras culture here and about all that kind of thing. A few years back, and I'm not saying that anyone should do this, I'm not advocating for this. Sporting Club are in absolute disarray, and their ultras went into the Sporting dressing room. Players left on free contracts because it was such chaos. Like, if you thought Celtic this season was chaotic, Sporting Club, I think pre-Amorim, or maybe the manager before Amorim, chaos, right? Chaos. But Portuguese clubs, especially the big three, they are the model. And I think people like me and you having written articles and for years wondered what Celtic can do and who they can base themselves on. The big three in Portugal are a fantastic example because you've got Benfica, who we've got some really good players off, but they're able to sell high quality players for Celtic prices because they can generate this insane crop of players every year on year. Sporting Club are really good. They've got some excellent players coming through. I think Giovanni Quenda, who I think is signed for Chelsea, he's a real talent. They've produced so many great players, and they've got this really great sort of homegrown kind of contingent within their squad that's doing so well in the Champions League. So yeah, Bodo are a great example, and I think it'd be it wouldn't be a positive thing to ignore what Bodo are doing, but yeah, also kind of bringing in the clubs like Portugal's big three, because there is such a good precedent there. They're historic clubs with a similar level of support to Celtic. Excellent infrastructure, but are playing literally leagues above what we're able to do in terms of Europe. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, a good point from the chat here, and I think it is good. And I'm not disparaging what you've just said, because I think you take what lessons you can take, and obviously some stuff that doesn't apply. I mean, Liam Devine, amongst others, just pointing out there's a historic connection between Portugal and South America that like clubs there take advantage of. But your point is not just to copy what clubs in Portugal are doing. Your point is to understand the processes they have in place that maximize the resources that they have. That's the point you're making, Ewan. Not to tell you what you're saying.
But thank you. No, I think yes, but also there's an element of both, because Celtic are capable of clever recruitment. We've seen in the past, and they've tried to establish these links. You talk about Latin America. Celtic did have that. I don't know if they still have that connection to Santos Laguna, and there is that possibility.
Yeah, I think that's long gone. That's long gone.
That's long.
Yeah,
Pedro Cachina ruined that, I think. God, I hadn't said that name in a long time. So there is that possibility of establishing these links, and yeah, they do take time to bear fruit and all this kind of thing. But also, what the Portuguese teams the clubs are really good at is, again, producing their own homegrown talent, and that's not just in terms of players, but it's also in terms of managers. And you've seen Jose Mourinho go back to Benfica in a sort of full circle moment, but these are clubs that have a similar level of support as Celtic, but they seem to just be more organised in everything that they do from academy level up the way. And they're fighting
just
over
off the top of your head,
Ian,
sorry to butt in, but because I don't know the answer to this, but I know it's in the back of my head somewhere. Did all of these clubs utilize like membership schemes to leverage their global support and kind of allow fans to buy in that sense? I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Benfica do that actually, but I'm not sure about Sporting, etc. I'm not sure if you know, but I've always thought there's probably and again, I don't want to go down the route of, because there's currently a not another penny boycott campaign. But I think if Celtic are to move forward positively and progressively, I think engaging supporters in a way that's meaningful, in a way that they can continue to invest in the team beyond the 50,000 or so season ticket holders, might be a good way forward to generate future revenue and allow a lot of supporters around the world feel like they maybe have a bigger stake in the club.
You're absolutely right. So Benfica, to the best of my knowledge, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong here. No, genuinely, please do. I like to learn things. I'm a very humble man. No, I believe after Bayern Munich, Benfica, and maybe Barcelona, Real Madrid. I'm not entirely sure how their model works in reference to this, but I think outside Bayern Munich, they're the biggest fan-owned club or fan-led club in Europe, and it's sort of. I understand the argument of, if you sack the board, who do you replace it with? But I think the kind of idea initially was to have a more democratic, fan-owned vision of the club, where there's memberships and people paying their membership, and you can pay into your season ticket or whatever. But it's a much more democratic process, and like you say, that the fans contribute to the running of the club at a sort of at the political level, but also in terms of financially. And Bayern Munich, Bayern Munich. They're not the greatest case example to compare ourselves to, but I mean, in terms of like aspiration, why not? You can look at that. But Benfica certainly, the fan involvement at Benfica is substantial. And I'm not saying, again, in the context of kind of what's happened with Benfica in the Champions League and kind of the scandals they've been involved with, I'm not saying we should copy what Benfica do. I think their messaging over the last couple of months has been terrible about this particular incident against Real Madrid. But yeah, there's definitely a case we can say where, what if there was a membership model at Celtic? It's not necessarily about billionaires replacing billionaires. You can have models where fans chip in, and there's a more sort of holistic kind of running of the club, because that is successful around Europe. It is a thing. It's not. There are multiple ways for a football club to be run, and if you don't like what's happening at Celtic just now, there are other modes, there are other modalities of doing it. And you can look at Benfica and you can look at Bayern Munich, and you can look at, even to an extent, Real Madrid and Barcelona and say, well, is there something that we can utilize here?
And actually, I do think for all the ultimately, I think the Celtic fans collective and other groups have the best intentions. A lot of this season, the discussion around Celtic has been about recriminations for people who are already there, and like assigning blame and kind of get these guys out, etc. What I want, and hopefully will naturally happen as we continue moving forward, is more conversations about what we want Celtic to be, not what Celtic have been. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So I just think that would also just diffuse all the anger too, and maybe that might fall on deaf ears. I know everyone loves a good drama, but I would prefer to have
I do.
conversations of this ilk about, how do Celtic maximise their potential. That's really what it gets at. That's the heart of it. And actually, hopefully, that is conversations that supporters, not just ourselves, but also fan groups and other media outlets manage to have over the coming months and years, because that's far more interesting to me than going, get this guy out, he's been a shambles. And because it's impulsive to want to do that, and I understand why people do it. And actually, effecting change is important ultimately, but at the same time, just winding yourself up is not constructive.
No, exactly. And I think A, you're right, and B, the kind of model we're talking about, if you want to talk about different kind of models of running club, it makes us less susceptible to multi-club ownership, which I think would be disastrous for the club, and also would make us a bit less vulnerable to kind of consortiums or ownership groups like we see at Chelsea, for example, which, okay, yeah, they can buy 1 million players, but it kind of erodes the identity of a club, I think. So yeah, you look at Portugal, you look at the way Germany runs their football clubs, and yeah, like you say, it's just about freshness of ideas. And I think I love Scottish football and I always will with every fibre of my being. But I think we have a bit of a reluctance to look at kind of not even new ideas, but ideas that are outside of our own experience. And you can look at like Hearts and Motherwell and other fan-run clubs, and it's not quite the same as what we're talking about, but just because things have been a certain way and things have, a status quo exists, it doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be that way. There are other and better ways of doing things, and there are other ways of doing things that you can try. They don't work out, and you go back to the original with some tweaks. But things don't have to stay the same. It doesn't have to be a stasis. You can try new ideas, and I think that's something that you can say for different parts around Celtic. You can say about so much is not going right, and we can look at different ideas.
And actually, I think back to the 90s and the formation of Celtic as a kind of PLC and Fergus McCann coming in. And at that stage, there was almost a democracy to making Celtic a PLC at that point. I remember my uncles and my dad like putting money in, buying shares, and it was all felt democratic. It felt like Celtic fans were taking some sort of ownership of the club. Naturally, is what has happened over the last 30 years or so, is just what happens in general in society, is that control further and further goes to those who are richer and those who have more power and like to hold on to that power. And actually, maybe the model that Celtic is set up with as a PLC is probably, it feels out of touch with the Celtic sport, whereas at its initiation, at its beginning, it felt totally lockstep with what the club's fans wanted to achieve. They wanted to move past the chaos of ruling families and move past and bring some sort of structure to the business side of Celtic. And it aided Celtic so incredibly well. I guess this is now a difficult part where that's now clashing with kind of renewed hopes and ambitions within the Celtic support. So that's all part of it for me. And again, that's part of it for me more than anger at an individual. It's about what we want Celtic to play. It's also about Celtic understanding, well, what are they? What are Celtic right now? I've said this before, but are they a business that has a football team, or are they a football club? And that's sometimes what it comes down to. And those are I said at the start we wouldn't be having existential conversations, but that's genuinely the kind of existential chat that Celtic need to be having internally about how they move forward here.
Yeah, you're right. I'm just very conscious of the fact that when I've contributed to Hamish's channel, I often end up getting called a communist for some reason. So I need to be really careful what I say. But and that's definitely not what I'm trying to get across here. But yeah, and you talk about the 90s and how it was kind of maybe the end of family dynasties and all that kind of thing. And I think without naming names necessarily, I think we can maybe suggest that we've reverted to type a little bit. yeah, like I mean, there's so much about Celtic that's special, and from the foundation upwards, foundation of the club upwards, and and how it's been kind of run in the past, and what the initial goals were, and all that kind of thing. And I think there's something quite, and again, I use the word romantic a lot when I'm on a channel with you, John. I think it's just the impact you have on me. But there is something romantic about a notion, and it's not an unrealistic notion where fans can, I know the shareholder model exists, but there is a more democratic idea, a notion of what Celtic can be, where there's a club president who is accountable to the fans, and there are the fans forums that are actually more meaningful, and it becomes less of a, well, I know you pay your money and you filled out this form and we take it very seriously. That turns into, okay, well, yeah, you have a vote here. You have a vote in terms of the running of the club. Uh, that would be great. That'd be great. And again, that's not some like, it's not some mad like socialist ideal of like what Celtic 2050 could be. It's a thing that happens around the world.
Yeah, it's already happening. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Very successfully, very successful. And again, you look at Portugal, you look at Germany as really good examples of that. And I think, and I'm not crying out for like Bolshevik revolution here. I'm just saying there's a way of doing things that there are new ideas and old ideas, and I think it's just
Bolshevik. Who does he play for you in?
Lokomotiv Moscow, I think.
Okay,
Speedy.
folks. We're going to wrap up there. We don't get too deep into political theory here, but we appreciate you joining us in the live chat as always. And if you have any thoughts on what we've discussed today, from Kasper Schmeichel to ownership models of football clubs around Europe, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as always. I read every comment, everyone. So I'm how I see the comments is just like, it's a good sounding board for me to kind of take the pulse of what our audience wants and is thinking about and wants us to talk about. So if you have any burning thoughts that you don't want to bring up in the live chat because you fear I'm going to put your name on the screen, don't worry, you can leave a comment below safely and let us know your thoughts of the day. Fascinating show, Ewan. Thanks for your insight today. We'll be back tomorrow with another show, everyone, and we'll see you again next time on The Celtic Way.